The morning sun cast long shadows across Daejeon Training Base. Drill Master Tay stood at the landing pad, his back straight and his face stern. He watched the sky, waiting for the transport shuttle. His eyes narrowed against the bright light as he spotted the craft, a small dot growing larger as it approached. Tay checked his watch. The shuttle was right on time. It carried 30 new recruits for the Earth Alliance forces, young men and women who had never seen combat. But Tay was not thinking about them. His mind was on another passenger, Sergeant Jiwoo Park. 3 years ago, Jiwoo had left this same base as a fresh graduate. Now she was returning as a war hero, though the official record said little about what she had done. Tay had trained thousands of soldiers in his 15 years as drill master, but he remembered Jiwoo clearly. She had been quiet but determined, always the first to volunteer for extra training. The shuttle engines roared as the craft lowered onto the landing pad. Dust swirled around Tay's polished boots, but he did not move. The door of the shuttle opened with a hiss of air, and the ramp extended to the ground. "Welcome to Daejeon Training Base," Tay called out as the first recruits appeared. "Form a line to your right." The young people stumbled out, blinking in the sunlight. They carried small bags of personal items. Everything else would be provided by the base. Their civilian clothes looked out of place against the stark military buildings behind Tay. Then Jiwoo appeared in the doorway. Tay almost did not recognize her. She wore the standard gray uniform of an Alliance sergeant, with 3 service stripes on her sleeve. Her black hair was cut short, regulation length, but her face had changed. The eager young cadet was gone. In her place stood a woman whose dark eyes seemed to look through Tay, not at him. "Sergeant Park," Tay said, offering a crisp salute. Jiwoo returned the salute with perfect form. Drill Master Tay reporting as ordered. Her voice was flat, giving away nothing. Tay studied her face, looking for signs of what she had experienced. The official report said only that she had served with distinction in the Proxima Centauri conflict. The details were classified. "Your quarters are prepared," Tay said. "You'll begin assistant drill instructor duties tomorrow at 600. "Yes, sir." Jiwoo picked up her bag, a standard military duffel that looked almost empty. "The mess hall is serving until 2100 if you're hungry after your journey." "Thank you, sir." Tay watched as Jiwoo walked away. Her steps were measured and even. Too even, he thought, like someone who had learned to move carefully through dangerous territory. That night, Tay sat in his office reviewing files on his tablet. The faces of the new recruits stared back at him from their profile pictures. Young, nervous, untested, the Alliance needed soldiers badly. The war with the Centauri was not going well. He tapped on Jiwoo's file. Most of it was blocked by security clearances higher than his own. He could see her basic information. Age 25, born in New Seoul, graduated top of her class from Daejeon. Then a long list of missions with all details redacted, followed by an impressive array of medals and commendations. A knock at his door interrupted his reading. "Enter," Tay called. The door slid open to reveal Captain Minho, the base commander. He was a short man with graying hair and tired eyes. "Still working, drill master?" Minho asked, stepping into the office. "Just reviewing the new arrivals, sir." Minho nodded. "Including our returning hero, I assume. Sergeant Park?" "Yes." Tay set down his tablet. "Her file doesn't tell me much." "That's because most of what she did can't be put in a file." Minho sat down heavily in the chair across from Tai's desk. "I received a personal communication from General Yuna about her." Tay raised his eyebrows. General Yuna commanded the entire Proxima Centauri defense fleet. "What did it say?" "That Sergeant Park is one of the most valuable soldiers in the Alliance, and that she needs time to readjust." "Readjust to what?" Tay asked. Minho's face grew serious. "To being human again." The next morning, Tay stood in the training yard watching the new recruits struggle through their first physical assessment. They ran laps around the yard, many already breathing hard. Tay shook his head. They had a long way to go. Jiwoo appeared at his side, silent as a shadow. She wore the gray training uniform of an instructor, her rank insignia gleaming on her collar. "Your assessment, Sergeant?" Tai asked. "They're soft," Jiwoo said. "Civilian soft." "You were the same when you arrived, was I?" Jiwoo's voice held no emotion. "I don't remember," Tay glanced at her. In the morning light, he could see faint lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 3 years ago. A thin white scar ran along her jawline, almost invisible unless you knew to look for it. "What do you remember, Sergeant?" he asked quietly. Jiwoo's eyes remained fixed on the running recruits. "Everything that matters, sir." A young recruit stumbled and fell to his knees, gasping for breath. Before Tay could move, Jiwoo was already crossing the yard. She stopped in front of the fallen recruit, who looked up at her with fear in his eyes. "Name?" Jiwoo asked. "Do-hyun, Sergeant," the young man panted. "Get up, Recruit Do-hyun." The recruit tried to stand but fell back to one knee. "I can't, Sergeant." "I need a minute." Jiwoo knelt down beside him. The other recruits continued running, casting nervous glances at the scene. "Listen to me," Jiwoo said, her voice low but carrying to where Tai stood. "Out there, beyond our atmosphere, there is no I can't. There is no I need a minute. There is only what must be done to survive." Do-hyun stared at her, his breathing still heavy. "The enemy doesn't care if you're tired," Jiwoo continued. "The vacuum of space doesn't care if your muscles hurt. Your fellow soldiers will depend on you, and you cannot fail them." She stood and extended her hand. After a moment, Do-hyun took it and she pulled him to his feet. "Now run," she said. "Run because your life depends on it. Because one day it will." Do-hyun nodded and rejoined the other recruits, his pace slow but determined. Jiwoo returned to Tai's side. For a moment, neither spoke. "You've seen combat," Tae finally said. It wasn't a question, yes, the real thing. Not the simulations we run here. "The simulations don't capture the smell," Jiwoo said, "or the sounds, or the way the ground shakes when a Centauri warship breaks atmosphere." Tae turned to face her fully. "These recruits need to know what they're training for. What they'll face out there." "No," Jiwoo said sharply. "They need to be ready. Knowledge without preparation is worse than ignorance. And how do we prepare them for something we've never experienced ourselves?" Tae asked. Jiwoo's eyes met his for the first time. In them, Tae saw something that made him want to step back. A darkness, a depth of experience that seemed to reach beyond her years. "That," she said quietly, "is why I'm here." The training hall was large and bright. Morning light streamed through high windows, falling on 30 recruits standing in neat rows. They wore simple gray workout clothes with their names printed on the front. Their faces showed a mix of fear and excitement. Drill Master Tae walked slowly in front of them, hands clasped behind his back. "Combat training begins today," he announced. "In this room you will learn to defend yourselves and your fellow soldiers." The recruits stood straighter at his words. Some looked eager, others nervous. "Sergeant Park will lead this session," Tae continued. "She has fought the Centauri forces directly. Listen to her. Your lives may depend on it." He stepped aside and Jiwoo moved to the center of the room. The recruits watched her with wide eyes. Stories about her had already spread through the barracks, whispered tales of battles and bravery, most of them made up. "Pair up," Jiwoo ordered. Her voice was not loud, but it carried across the silent room. The recruits scrambled to find partners. One young woman was left without a pair. She stood awkwardly looking around. "Name?" Jiwoo asked her. "Recruit Sumi, Sergeant," the young woman replied, standing at attention. "You'll work with me." Jiwoo turned to address the whole group. "The first rule of combat against Centauri forces is simple. They are not human. Do not expect them to move like humans." She motioned for Sumi to stand opposite her on the training mat. The other recruits formed a circle around them. "The Centauri evolved on a planet with higher gravity than Earth," Jiwoo explained. "They appear heavy and slow. This is deceptive." Without warning, Jiwoo moved. One moment she was standing still. The next she had swept Sumi's legs from under her. The recruit hit the mat with a surprised gasp. "They are faster than they look," Jiwoo said, helping Sumi to her feet. "And stronger." For the next hour, Jiwoo demonstrated basic defensive moves. The recruits practiced in pairs, their movements clumsy but improving. Tae watched from the side of the room, noting how Jiwoo corrected their form with short, clear instructions. "Wider stance, Recruit Do-hyun. Keep your guard up, Recruit Mina. Faster, all of you. The enemy won't wait." Near the end of the session, a tall recruit named Junho raised his hand. "Sergeant, is it true you fought at Epsilon Station?" The room fell silent. Everyone had heard of Epsilon Station. It was the worst defeat in Alliance history. Thousands of soldiers had died when the Centauri overran the space station. Few had escaped. Jiwoo's face showed nothing. "This is combat training, not story time. But you were there, right?"
Junho pressed.
The other instructors said. The other instructors talk too much, Jiwoo cut him off. Focus on your training. Tae stepped forward. That's enough for today. Showers, then lunch. Afternoon drills begin at 1300 hours. The recruits filed out, still casting curious glances at Jiwoo. When they were gone, Tae approached her. They're going to keep asking, he said. Jiwoo was collecting training equipment, her movements efficient. Let them ask. They need to understand what they're training for. They need to be ready, Jiwoo replied. Understanding can come later. Tae watched her for a moment. Join me for lunch in my office. We need to discuss the training program. It wasn't really a request. Jiwoo nodded once. Yes, sir. Tae's office was small but neat. A desk, 2 chairs, and a narrow window overlooking the training yard. On the walls hung maps of star systems and alliance territory. Jiwoo sat across from Tae, her back straight, her food barely touched. Between them on the desk lay a tablet showing training schedules. Your combat program is good, Tae said, but it's not enough. The basics are sound, Jiwoo replied. With time, we don't have time. Tae's voice was firm. The Centauri are pushing closer to Earth every month. These recruits might be in combat within 6 weeks. Jiwoo's face remained calm, but her hand tightened around her water cup. 6 weeks isn't enough. It's all we have. Tae leaned forward. That's why I requested you specifically. Your experience, my experience cannot be taught in 6 weeks, Jiwoo interrupted. Or 6 years, Tae studied her face. In the office light, he could see more scars, a thin line above her right eyebrow, another at the base of her neck disappearing into her collar. What happened at Epsilon Station? He asked quietly. Jiwoo set down her cup. It's classified. I have clearance, not for this, Tae sighed. The official report says you led an evacuation that saved 200 civilians. It says you held a corridor against Centauri forces for 3 hours while the escape pods launched. It says you were the last Alliance soldier to leave the station. The official report is incomplete, Jiwoo said. Then complete it for me. Tae's voice softened. Not as your superior officer. As someone who sends young people into battle every day. For a long moment, Jiwoo was silent. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. We weren't ready. None of us. We had trained, we had the best equipment, but we weren't ready for what they really were. The Centauri? Jiwoo nodded. The reports call them soldiers. That's not accurate. They're something else. Something made for war. She looked down at her hands. Tae noticed a pattern of small circular scars across her knuckles, too regular to be from combat. We need to change the training, Jiwoo said suddenly. The defensive techniques are wrong. The Centauri don't attack like human opponents. Show me, Tae said. That afternoon, the training hall was empty except for Tae and Jiwoo. They stood facing each other on the mat, both in training clothes. A Centauri soldier doesn't telegraph its moves, Jiwoo explained. There's no shift of weight, no preparation. They just move. She demonstrated, attacking Tae with a speed that surprised him. He blocked, but barely. They have 4 arms, not 2, Jiwoo continued. The lower set is smaller but stronger. They use it to grapple while the upper arms strike. She positioned Tae's arms to mimic the attack, then showed him how to defend against it. Their joints bend differently, she said. What looks like an opening isn't. What looks like an attack often isn't. For an hour they worked through different scenarios. Tae was a skilled fighter, but he found himself struggling to adapt to the strange patterns Jiwoo demonstrated. This is what the recruits need to learn, Jiwoo said finally, stepping back. Not standard Alliance combat techniques. Tae wiped sweat from his forehead. You're right. We'll revise the program. Jiwoo nodded, but her mind seemed elsewhere. She stared at the far wall, seeing something beyond the training hall. There's more, Tae said gently. Isn't there? Jiwoo's eyes refocused on him. Yes, but not for the recruits. Not yet. For me then, Tae said. I need to know what we're really preparing them for. Jiwoo was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached for the zipper of her training jacket. The Centauri don't just kill, she said. They change you? She unzipped the jacket halfway and pulled the collar aside. On her shoulder and collarbone, Tae saw a pattern of circular scars, similar to those on her hands, but larger. They formed a deliberate pattern, like some kind of writing. What is that? Tae asked, his voice hushed. Neural parasites, Jiwoo replied, her voice clinical and detached. They attach to the nervous system. They let the Centauri control captured soldiers. Tae felt cold despite the sweat of their training session. Control how? Completely. Jiwoo zipped her jacket back up. That's what happened to half my squad at Epsilon Station. They were turned against us. The horror of what she was saying sank in slowly. You had to fight your own people. They weren't our people anymore, Jiwoo said. Her voice was flat, but her eyes held a pain that made Tae look away. That's what the recruits need to be ready for. Not just fighting the enemy, but fighting what the enemy can make of us. Tae nodded slowly. We'll adapt the training. Whatever you think is necessary. It won't be enough, Jiwoo said, but it's a start. As they left the training hall, Tae noticed that Jiwoo's hand kept rising to her collar, touching the hidden scars beneath the fabric. He wondered what other wounds she carried, invisible but just as deep. Night fell over Daejeon training base. The main light shut off at 2200 hours, leaving only the soft blue glow of security lamps along the paths. Most of the base slept, resting for another day of hard training. Drill Master Tae walked the quiet halls, making his final rounds. He checked doors, noted a broken light to be fixed tomorrow, and listened to the soft hum of the base's systems. These night walks helped him think, and tonight he had much to think about. The new combat training program was taking shape. For 3 days now, Jiwoo had been teaching the recruits how to fight against an enemy that moved in ways humans did not. The recruits were struggling, but they were learning. Tae passed the barracks where the recruits slept. From inside came the sounds of deep breathing and occasional snores. These young people had no idea what waited for them in space. Even with Jiwoo's training, they could not truly understand. As Tae neared the officers' quarters, he heard something that did not belong in the quiet night. A cry short, sharp, and quickly cut off. He stopped, listening. It came again, muffled but clear enough to follow. The sound led him to Jiwoo's door. Tae hesitated. Officers' quarters were private space, but the cry had sounded like pain, like fear. He knocked softly. No answer came, but he heard movement inside. He knocked again, a little louder. Sergeant Park. It's Drill Master Tae. The door slid open. Jiwoo stood in the doorway wearing standard gray sleep clothes. Her hair was damp with sweat, her eyes too wide and too alert for someone who had been sleeping. Sir? She said, her voice steady despite her appearance. Is something wrong? I heard a sound, Tae said carefully. I was concerned. Jiwoo's hand went to her temple where a small device was attached to her skin. It was a neural suppressor, standard issue for soldiers who had seen heavy combat. It was supposed to prevent nightmares. The light on Jiwoo's device was blinking red instead of the steady green it should show. Your suppressor is malfunctioning, Tae noted. No, sir. I turned it off, Tae frowned. That's against medical protocol. Yes, sir. Jiwoo made no excuse, offered no explanation. Tae studied her face. The shadows under her eyes were darker than they had been that morning. May I come in, Sergeant? Jiwoo stepped back, allowing him to enter. Her quarters were small and almost empty. A bed, a desk, a chair. No personal items except a small metal box on the desk. The bed covers were twisted and thrown aside, evidence of a restless sleep. Why did you turn off your suppressor? Tae asked. Jiwoo stood at attention, as if this were a formal meeting rather than a middle-of-the-night conversation. The dreams, they're important. Nightmares are not important. They're harmful. That's why we have suppressors. With respect, sir, you're wrong. For the first time, Tae heard emotion in Jiwoo's voice, a quiet intensity. The dreams keep me connected to what happened, to the people who didn't come back. Tae gestured to the chair. Sit down, Sergeant. That's an order. Jiwoo sat. Tae took a seat on the edge of the bed, facing her. Tell me about these dreams, he said. Jiwoo looked down at her hands. The small circular scars on her knuckles seemed to stand out in the dim light of the room. I see their faces, she said quietly. My squad. The civilians we were protecting. The ones we couldn't save. At Epsilon Station? Jiwoo nodded. And other places. Proxima Outpost. The mining colony on Ceres. The battle for the Jupiter Gate. Tae had read about these battles in reports. Brutal fights, heavy losses. He had not known Jiwoo was at all of them. In the dreams, I'm always too slow, Jiwoo continued. Too weak. I watch them die again and again. That's why we have suppressors, Tae said gently. No one can carry that burden every night. I need to carry it. Jiwoo looked up, meeting his eyes. If I forget them, who will remember? Most of them don't even have graves, Tae understood then. This wasn't just about nightmares. It was about honor, about duty to the fallen. He had seen it before in veteran soldiers. "Tell me about your squad," he said. For a moment he thought Jiwoo would refuse. Then she reached for the small metal box on her desk. She opened it and took out a flat device. When she pressed a button, a holographic image appeared in the air between them. 6 soldiers in combat armor stood together, arms around each other's shoulders. They were smiling, their faces young and full of life. Jiwoo stood in the middle, looking so different from the woman who sat before Tae now. In the image, her eyes were bright, her smile wide and genuine. "This was my squad," Jiwoo said. "Special Combat Unit 17. We called ourselves the Ghosts." She pointed to each face, naming them. "Minjae Yunha Daehyun Yuri Jinwoo." Her finger lingered on the last face. "And me. Where are they now?" Tae asked, though he feared he knew the answer. Minjae and Yunha died on Ceres. Daehyun at the Jupiter Gate. Jiwoo's voice remained steady, but her finger trembled slightly as she pointed to the last 2 faces. Yuri and Jinwoo were at Epsilon Station. They were taken by the Centauri. Infected with neural parasites, Tae felt a chill. "You had to fight them." "Yes." The word was simple, but the pain behind it was not. "I'm sorry," Tae said, knowing how inadequate the words were. Jiwoo closed the hologram and put the device back in its box. "The recruits asked me about my service. They want stories of heroism and victory. They don't understand that sometimes survival is the only victory we get." "They need to understand," Tae said. "Not everything, perhaps, but enough to know what they're fighting for." "What they're fighting against," Jiwoo shook her head. "Words won't make them understand. Nothing can except experience." "There must be a way," Tae insisted. "Something between words and combat." Jiwoo was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked up, a new resolve in her eyes. "There is one way, but it would require special permission, and it would be difficult. For the recruits, for me." "What are you thinking?" "A neural link simulation," Jiwoo said. "Using my memories." Tae stared at her. Neural link technology was advanced and rarely used outside of medical treatment. It allowed one person's memories to be experienced by another, not just seen but felt as if they were there. "That's extremely invasive," Tae said. "And potentially traumatic. For you and for them." "Yes," Jiwoo agreed, "but it would show them the truth. Not just how to fight, but why we fight. What happens if we fail?" Tae stood up and paced the small room. What Jiwoo suggested was unusual, possibly against regulations. But if it worked, if it truly prepared the recruits for what they would face. "I'll speak to Captain Minho in the morning," he decided. "If he approves, we'll set up a controlled simulation. Voluntary participation only." "Thank you, sir," Jiwoo said. Tae moved to the door, then paused. "Try to get some rest, Sergeant. And please turn your suppressor back on, just for tonight." Jiwoo's hand went to the device at her temple. "I'll try, sir." As Tae left, he glanced back. Jiwoo sat very still, looking at the metal box that held the images of her lost friends. In that moment, she seemed both very young and very old at the same time. The door closed between them, but Tae stood in the hallway for a long moment. The base was quiet again, but he knew that behind many doors, soldiers carried private battles that continued long after the fighting stopped. He resumed his rounds, his steps echoing in the empty corridor. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Tonight, at least, he understood a little more about the woman who had returned from war carrying wounds that no medical scan could detect. Captain Minho's office was larger than Tae's, with a window that looked out over the mountains beyond the base. The captain sat behind his desk, reading the proposal on his tablet. His face gave nothing away. Tae and Jiwoo stood at attention, waiting. The morning sun cast long shadows across the floor. Finally, Minho set down the tablet. "A neural link demonstration using combat memories," he said. "This is highly unusual, Drill Master." "Yes, sir," Tae agreed. "But these are unusual times. And you're willing to share your memories, Sergeant Park? Even knowing how difficult that will be?" Jiwoo's face remained calm. "Yes, sir. The recruits need to understand what they're facing." Minho tapped his fingers on the desk, thinking. "The medical team has concerns. Neural links can cause trauma to both the memory donor and the recipients." "We'll take all necessary precautions," Tae said. "Participation will be voluntary. Medical staff will monitor everyone involved." "And what exactly do you plan to show them?" Minho asked Jiwoo directly. "Epsilon Station, sir," she replied. "Not the whole battle. Just enough to show them what Centauri forces are really like." What happens to those they capture? Minho's eyes narrowed. Those files are classified at the highest level. I'm not showing them files, sir. Just my personal experience, which includes classified information. Information they need to survive, sir. The room fell silent. Minho studied Jiwoo's face, then Tae's. Finally, he sighed. Very well. One demonstration. Limited to 20 volunteers. Full medical team present. He fixed Jiwoo with a stern look. And you will work with Dr. Han to select which memories are appropriate. Is that clear? Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. As they left the office, Tae glanced at Jiwoo. Her face showed relief but also tension. Are you sure about this? He asked quietly. No, Jiwoo admitted. But I'm sure it's necessary. Word spread quickly through the base. By afternoon, more than 50 recruits had volunteered for the neural link demonstration. Tae had to select just 20, choosing those who showed the most promise but also the most need for understanding. The medical bay was transformed for the event. 20 recliners were arranged in a circle, each with neural link equipment attached. In the center stood a single chair for Jiwoo. Dr. Han, the chief medical officer, checked each piece of equipment personally. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. This is still a bad idea, she told Tae as they watched the preparations. Neural links are meant for therapy, not training. Sometimes training is therapy, Tae replied. These young people need to know what they're walking into. Dr. Han shook her head. Just make sure Sergeant Park doesn't push too far. I've seen her medical file. What she experienced. She didn't finish the sentence. The recruits filed in at 1400 hours. They looked nervous but determined as medical staff helped them into the recliners. Recruit Sumi, the young woman who had partnered with Jiwoo in that first training session, caught Tae's eye and gave a small nod. Beside her, Recruit Doyun fidgeted with his sleeve. Jiwoo entered last. She wore a simple black t-shirt and pants, no uniform today. The scars on her arms were visible, thin white lines and the circular marks that Tae now knew were from neural parasites. The recruits stared, some with wide eyes, others quickly looking away. Dr. Han helped Jiwoo into the central chair and attached the main neural transmitter to her temple, replacing her suppressor. Remember, she said quietly, you control the depth and duration. If it becomes too much, end it immediately. Jiwoo nodded. Her eyes moved around the circle, meeting each recruit's gaze. What you're about to experience happened 3 years ago, she said. It is real. It was real. Remember that when you go into combat. Dr. Han moved to a control panel. Neural link activating in 3, 2, 1. The lights dimmed. Jiwoo closed her eyes. Around the circle, the recruits did the same, their bodies tensing as the link established. Tae watched from the side of the room, unable to see what they were experiencing, but able to observe their reactions. Some recruits gripped the arms of their chairs. Others' breathing quickened. One young man let out a soft gasp. In the center, Jiwoo sat very still, but her face showed the strain. Reliving these memories was clearly painful for her. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Dr. Han checked her monitors with growing concern. Heart rates are elevated, she murmured to Tae. Stress indicators are high. Is it dangerous? Tae asked. Not yet. But soon a cry broke the silence. Recruit Do-Yun was shaking in his chair, his face twisted in fear. Dr. Han moved quickly to his side, ready to disconnect him. Wait, Tae said, placing a hand on her arm. Look at the others. Around the circle, the recruits' expressions had changed from fear to something else. Determination, anger, resolve. Even Do-Yun's shaking had stopped, replaced by a tense stillness. 5 more minutes passed. Then, as if on cue, all 20 recruits opened their eyes. They blinked, looking around the room as if seeing it for the first time. Some had tears on their faces. Others looked pale and shaken. In the center, Jiwoo opened her eyes last. She looked exhausted, her face drawn and tight with pain. Dr. Han quickly moved through the circle, checking each recruit, disconnecting the neural equipment. Her assistants offered water, spoke quiet words of reassurance. No one spoke. The room was filled with the sound of deep breathing as the recruits tried to process what they had experienced. Finally, Recruit Sumi broke the silence. They weren't just killing, she said, her voice shaking. They were harvesting, Jiwoo nodded once. Yes. The neural parasites, Recruit Junho said. They attach to the spine first, then spread to the brain. He touched the back of his neck as if feeling phantom pain. Yes, Jiwoo said again. Your squad, Do-hyun said quietly. You had to. You had to fight them. After they were taken, Jiwoo's eyes met his. Yes, the room fell silent again. Tae watched the recruits' faces, seeing the change in them. They had entered this room as trainees. They were leaving as soldiers who understood the enemy. Dr. Han finished her checks and approached Tae. No lasting physical damage, she reported. But I want them all to report for psychological evaluation tomorrow. Of course, Tae agreed. And Sergeant Park? Dr. Han glanced at Jiwoo, who was now standing, receiving quiet thanks from the recruits as they filed out. She's stronger than she looks. But this took a toll. She needs rest. When the last recruit had left, Tae approached Jiwoo. She stood very still in the center of the now empty circle of chairs. Thank you, Tae said simply. Jiwoo nodded. Her eyes were distant, still partly in the memories she had shared. What exactly did you show them? Tae asked. The truth, Jiwoo replied. The Centauri aren't just an enemy army. They're a different kind of life. They don't want our planet or our resources. They want us. Our bodies, our nervous systems. Tae had read the classified reports, but hearing it stated so plainly made his skin crawl. And now the recruits understand. Not completely, but enough. Jiwoo's hand went to her shoulder, touching one of the circular scars. Enough to know why we fight. Why we can't lose. As they left the medical bay, Tae noticed the recruits waiting in the hallway. They stood at attention, forming a line on both sides. As Jiwoo walked between them, they saluted. Not the casual salute of daily training, but the formal salute given to honored veterans. Jiwoo returned the salute, her back straight despite her exhaustion. In that moment, Tae saw what the recruits now saw. Not just an instructor, but a soldier who had faced the worst the enemy could offer, and had survived to prepare others for the same fight. The demonstration was over, but its impact was just beginning. Tomorrow, training would continue with new purpose and understanding. The recruits had seen the wounds of war, not just the physical scars, but the deeper ones that no medical technology could heal. And they had seen something else, too, the courage to carry those wounds and still stand ready to fight again. 6 weeks passed quickly at Daejeon Training Base. The mountains changed from summer green to early autumn gold. The days grew shorter, the mornings cooler, and the recruits changed too. Tae stood at the edge of the training field watching the final combat exercise. 30 young soldiers moved in perfect coordination, their bodies flowing through defensive patterns that had once seemed impossible to them. They no longer looked like civilians in uniforms. They moved like warriors. In the center of the field, Jiwoo called out commands. Her voice was strong and clear in the morning air. The recruits responded instantly, shifting from one formation to another. Centauri Attack Pattern 3, Defend. The recruits paired off, one playing the role of a Centauri soldier with its strange four-armed attack style. The defenders blocked and countered using the techniques Jiwoo had taught them. Faster, Jiwoo called. The enemy won't wait. Captain Minho approached, standing beside Tae to observe the exercise. Impressive, he said quietly. I've never seen recruits this prepared. Sergeant Park is an exceptional instructor, Tae replied. More than that. Minho nodded toward the field. Look at how they watch her. That's not just respect. That's trust. Tae had noticed it too. Since the neural link demonstration, the recruits had changed in their attitude toward Jiwoo. The curious stares and whispered questions were gone. In their place was a deep, quiet respect. The neural link was the right decision, Tae said. Yes, Minho agreed, though I still don't know exactly what they saw. They saw what they needed to see. The exercise ended. The recruits stood at attention, breathing hard but standing tall. Jiwoo walked among them, offering brief corrections and rare words of praise. Tomorrow you graduate, she told them. Tomorrow you become soldiers of the Earth Alliance. Today was your last training session with me. A murmur ran through the group. Some looked surprised, others disappointed. You have learned to fight an enemy unlike any human opponent, Jiwoo continued. You have learned to defend yourselves and each other. But the most important lesson is this. We fight not just for victory, but for survival. For humanity itself. She paused, looking at each face. Remember what you saw. Remember what you felt. And remember that you are never alone out there. Your squad is your family. Your strength. Dismissed, Tae called. Final equipment check at 1400 hours. The recruits saluted and began to file off the field. Several stopped to speak quietly to Jiwoo, offering thanks or asking last-minute questions. She answered each one with patience. When the field was empty, Jiwoo approached Tai and Minho. "They're ready, sir," she reported. "Thanks to you," Minho said. "General Yuna will be pleased with the results of this program. Will you stay to see them graduate?" Tai asked Jiwoo. She nodded. "Yes, then I report to the Jupiter Gate for reassignment." "Back to the front lines?" Minho asked, his eyebrows rising. "That's where I'm needed, sir." Tai felt a twinge of concern. In 6 weeks, he had come to respect Jiwoo deeply. The thought of her returning to combat troubled him. "Your work here is important too," he said. "Training the next generation of soldiers." "Others can train them," Jiwoo replied. "Not many have seen what I've seen and survived to fight again." Minho nodded slowly. "Very well. I'll inform General Yuna of your decision." He walked away, leaving Tai and Jiwoo alone on the field. "Are you sure about this?" Tai asked when Minho was out of earshot. Jiwoo looked out over the empty training ground. "No," she admitted. "But it's where I belong." That evening, Tai found Jiwoo in the memorial garden. It was a quiet place at the edge of the base, with stone paths winding between flowering plants. At the center stood a wall of black stone, engraved with the names of fallen soldiers. Jiwoo stood before the wall, her hand resting on a section of names. She wore her formal uniform, pressed and perfect, with her service medals displayed on her chest. Tai approached quietly, not wanting to intrude on her private moment, but Jiwoo heard his footsteps and turned. "Drill Master," she greeted him. "I'm not interrupting?" "No." Jiwoo stepped back from the wall. "I was just visiting old friends." Tai looked at the names her hand had touched. Special Combat Unit 17 was engraved in the stone, followed by 4 names: Min-jae Kim, Yoon-ha Choi, Dae-hyun Park, Jin-woo Lee. 4 names, Tai noted. "You said there were 5 in your squad besides you?" "Yuri isn't listed," Jiwoo said quietly. "She's officially missing in action. The Alliance never recovered her body from Epsilon Station." Tai understood the pain behind those simple words. Without a body, there could be no closure, no certainty. "I wanted to thank you," he said, changing the subject. "The recruits are better prepared than any class I've seen in 15 years. "They worked hard," Jiwoo replied. "They wanted to learn." "Because you showed them the truth." Tai hesitated, then asked the question that had been on his mind for weeks. "What exactly did they see in that neural link?" Dr. Han said their stress levels were extremely high. Jiwoo was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was low but steady. "They saw Epsilon Station after the Centauri breached the main hull. They saw how the enemy moves in real combat, not just in training exercises. They saw what happens to those who are captured." "They saw your squad," Tai guessed. Jiwoo nodded. "Yuri and Jin-woo. After the neural parasites took them." Her hand went to her shoulder, touching the scars beneath her uniform. "And they saw how close I came to the same fate." Tai felt a chill despite the warm evening. "That's why you have those circular scars. The parasites attached to you, yes, but my squad, what was left of my squad, they got them off in time, before the parasites reached my brain." Jiwoo's voice remained calm, but her eyes held old pain. "The recruits needed to see that, to understand that some of us survive, that we can fight back. And now they know," Tai said. "They'll carry that knowledge with them." "Knowledge isn't enough," Jiwoo said. "They need courage, determination. They have those too. I've seen it growing in them day by day." They stood in silence for a while, looking at the wall of names. So many names from so many battles, each one a life given in defense of Earth and humanity. "Will you come back?" Tai finally asked. "After your next deployment?" "If I survive," Jiwoo said simply. "You will." Tai spoke with more confidence than he felt. "And when you do, there will be a place for you here. These recruits are just the first class. We need to train thousands more." Jiwoo turned to face him fully. For the first time since her arrival at the base, Tai saw a small smile touch her lips. "I'd like that," she said. "To build something instead of just fighting." Then it settled. Tai extended his hand. A promise between soldiers. Jiwoo took his hand. Her grip was firm, her palm marked with the same scars that covered so much of her body, wounds earned in service to humanity. "A promise," she agreed. The graduation ceremony took place the next morning under clear blue skies. The 30 recruits stood in formation, their new combat uniforms gleaming in the sunlight. Behind them, the mountains rose like silent guardians. Captain Minho gave a short speech about duty and honor. Then each recruit stepped forward to receive their official assignment and unit designation. Jiwoo and Tai stood to the side, watching as young faces filled with pride and purpose. These were no longer recruits. They were soldiers, ready to face whatever waited for them among the stars. When the last name was called, Minho turned to Jiwoo. "Sergeant Park, would you like to say a few words to the graduates?" Jiwoo stepped forward. The new soldiers stood at attention, their eyes fixed on her. "When I arrived 6 weeks ago," she began, "the drill master asked about my service record. I didn't answer him then. I couldn't find the words." She paused, looking at the faces before her, faces that now understood what words could not convey. "But you know now. You've seen what we're fighting for, what we're fighting against. You carry that knowledge with you just as I carry these." She touched her shoulder where the scars lay hidden beneath her uniform. "The wounds of war aren't just on our bodies, they're in our minds, our memories. But they are not weakness. They are strength. They are why we fight, why we must win." She straightened, her voice growing stronger. "Look to your left. Look to your right. These are your brothers and sisters now. Your family. Protect them, fight for them. And remember that somewhere other soldiers are fighting for you." The field was completely silent when she finished. Then as one, the 30 new soldiers saluted. Jiwoo returned the salute, her face solemn but her eyes bright with something that looked, to Tae, very much like hope. Later, as the transport shuttles prepared to take the soldiers to their assignments, Tae found Jiwoo watching from a distance. "Your legacy," he said, nodding toward the young soldiers saying their goodbyes. "Our legacy," Jiwoo corrected him. "What we build together lasts longer than what any of us do alone." Tae smiled. "A wise soldier once told me that." "No," Jiwoo said, "but perhaps a healing one did." As the shuttles rose into the blue sky, Tae saw Jiwoo touch the scars at her temple one last time. Then she turned away, toward the training fields where new recruits would soon arrive, where the work of preparation would begin again. The wounds of war would always be with her, but now they served a purpose beyond pain. They had become a bridge between those who had fought and those who would fight next, a silent testimony more powerful than any words could be.